Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Marissa Kozlov. It's great to have you with us for today's eMarketer Tech Talk, where we host guests from all areas of media, ad tech, and MarTech. Today, we'll hear effective brand building strategies, including tips to unify your team's creative efforts and balance creative innovation with media placements. So before we get to that great content, let's meet my two guests from Betty, a quad agency. First, we have Cari Bucci-Hulings, president of Betty. Cari, great to see you.
Hi, Marissa.
And we also have Liz Grabek, Senior Vice President of Consumer Strategy. Liz, so nice to have you here.
Hi, Marissa. Great to be here.
I'm so happy to have both of you. We have great content ahead. And I also want to remind our audience that if you have questions during the presentation today, you can use the chat window on the right side of your screen to tell us where you're coming from and also to submit any of those questions. We love to hear where you are in the world, but also you may have some questions for our guests, which we will be getting to during the live Q&A in the second part of the show. So please keep those questions coming. All right, as promised, that great content is ahead. Let's get started. Cari, over to you.
Well, we're thrilled to be here to talk to you today about brand and demand and how we can bridge that gap for marketers. We'll tell you a bit about who we are. We'll talk about this problem of brand and demand and what we do, some of the 5 principles that we do to help solve it and bridge that gap. We'll wrap it up for you and hopefully have a good Q&A session. So we are Betty. Betty is a creative agency inside of Quad. We are a new entity brought together of capabilities designed to build better on behalf of our clients and to bring creative soul and based in creativity in everything we do. We operate across the full range of marketing touch points, finding the strategies that will connect deeply with consumers in terms of culture and context. We create across all channels, and we'll talk a bit today about scale and how we get into truly activating for consumers in a 360 way. And we produce all of those things, giving our clients the opportunity to scale without sacrifice. So today we are here to help crack this code. I'm sure many of you have had this conversation with marketers where more than half of marketers feel like they're not really sure what's happening with their marketing investment. Is it really producing the type of financial results that they expect? When you look at demand generating activities, while there's something measurable there, certainly, we know that the brand has a huge impact on the effectiveness of that work. But we don't really know what all the time. And what has happened over time is these pieces have pulled so far apart that they're actually living in different teams. So while we know that demand driving work is very powerful in terms of commerce, and we know that brand image and brand impact is so powerful in terms of driving demand and building brand equity, these things are operating separately, and we have to challenge ourselves in modern marketing. Is that really what's the most effective? And we think it's not. So this may sound familiar to you. You may work in a separated team or work with a separated team. And we have a strong point of view that this can't be our future for marketing. We can't be talking about brand and demand separately. Consumers experience these things together. Brands live in a singular way. And if we pull these things apart, we reduce effectiveness for both of them. So we're going to talk today not about organizational structure, but about some of the driving principles that we think if we get these principles right and we're true to them, that we can bridge the divide between the brand teams and the demand teams so that we operate in service of the consumer and in service of the marketer's business. So I'm going to let Liz take you through the first 3 of these 5.
Thanks, Cari, and wholeheartedly agree, right? There has to be a better way. So let's get into it. What can we do about this? How do we start to bridge this gap? The first thing that I'll talk about is how we can fight the beige tax with truth. And I'll talk a little bit about what the beige tax is. It's not Cari and I showing up both only wearing white to the webinar, zero color. I'll talk a little bit about what the beige tax is and then what we can do about it. So not new news, right? If we look at this context, we know that we are all just inundated with so much content. I think the recent stat is an average person sees up to 10,000 ads every day. So even down to the minute, there's just so much content coming at us. And, we're all wrestling with this, right? How do we break through? How do we get people to pay attention when people are just inundated? And when we start to look at what are the things that are breaking through? Not surprisingly, when we look at what's not, it really is, it's the dull, forgettable, irrelevant, disconnected ads. Not only are they not breaking through, it's costing brands a lot of money. And, that's not new news, but what was surprising is when they really broke down and started to look at, what is this beige tax costing marketers? And, when we look at dull ads, it means a brand needs to spend 7.3% more on media to get the same effect. So that's costing US dull advertisers about $189 billion a year. That's insane. So if we think about how we start to counteract that and how do we start to break through, really it's starting with the truth. And when we think about the truth that it needs to start with, it's not our truth. And as marketers, we spend a lot of time thinking about ourselves. And when we look at what are the ads that are doing the best job of breaking through, they really are starting with the consumer. And they're understanding the consumer, they're diving in and they're looking at what really matters to them to really understand how to show up as more relevant, how to make a deeper connection. And we're seeing that 83% of consumers expressed a higher appreciation for brands that promote genuine connections with their communities. So this authenticity is key, really putting that understanding into how you're making more authentic connections. So we worked with a recent client, Raw Sugar, to do just that. So they had a really high-class problem. They're in the personal care space. They had a fantastic product with amazing distribution and really an opportunity to put raw sugar at the top of consumers' self-care shopping lists, which is no easy feat. If you've been in Target or Walmart recently, you know that those aisles are packed. There's a lot of options and there's a lot of shifting options. So really it's tough as we think about how to break through. So where we started with them is really starting with the truth. We looked at their consumer and we looked at, what is it that's unique about how they think about the world and how the role of personal care products and rituals might play into that. And what we found is, that this audience really had this genuine sense of optimism. They really relished every day. They really wanted to make sure that they surrounded themselves with positivity. And what was interesting is when we looked at the category was focused on stripping things down. It was focused on simplifying, taking things out, while also inflating the price tags. So what was interesting is, Raw Sugar had a really interesting antidote to that. They really focused on how to maximize the good of what they put in. They have these amazing scents that just brought joy and this sense of optimism to these consumers that were looking to really maximize joy in these rituals, and they weren't getting it. Like personal care had become really boring and it had become really stale and it had stripped out a lot of the joy. So being able to really focus on what was put into it really mapped into Raw Sugar's mission. They have this fantastic mission that's really authentic to who they are. That's all about clean for all. And it means no matter your background, no matter your hair type or age, Raw Sugar wants to be there for you and has the products that you need and is incredibly accessible. So really bringing that to life, we were able to really touch consumers in a way that a lot of the other brands in the personal care category were not. Okay, so let's get to the second one. And this is maybe one of my most favorite sayings in life. I think it applies to a lot of things, including marketing. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. I say this to my kids a lot. But if we think about especially digital marketing and digital ads, we have so many tools at our disposal. We can be in any place that we want to be to reach people. But just because we can doesn't mean we should, right? So, what all of that is doing is it's not making our advertising more impactful. In fact, we're actually seeing that majority of consumers say that the majority of digital ads that they see are irrelevant. So while we have so much to do more, while we're in many more spaces, that's not translating to impact. So we're seeing a lot of bad digital ads and what's happening here. One of the things that we believe is the reason for that is that we're not taking that step to bridge the creative with the moments that actually matter in the consumer journey. We're finding the right spaces and places where we believe people are going to be there and seeing the message, but we're not taking that extra step to make sure that we're taking a look at what are the messages? What are the things that we're saying to them in those spaces and places? Do we have a right, or are we wanted to be there in that moment? So we tackle this by what we call the 360 connection strategy. So, it's not new news to make sure that we're being contextual in how we're thinking about how and where our messages show up. But we believe that with everything people have going on in their lives and with so much content coming at them, it's really important that we're taking a look at what's happening around that moment. So if we're first looking at what are those moments that we believe the target is most receptive, it's important to layer on a few other questions to make sure that we're really focused in the right spaces and places. So taking a look at asking the question, what are the barriers that might prevent a connection in that moment? So they might be receptive, but are there barriers that are going to prevent us from having the impact that we would hope to have in that moment? Taking a look at what's happening from parallel brands and categories and how they're connecting with people in these moments. Is there anything that we can learn from that? Looking above, what is it that is relevant about how people are consuming media in these moments? How is that going to, lean into our effort, or how are we going to contend with that? And then besides that, how are they currently interacting with the brand in the category? Are they already getting a lot of messages in that moment? Is this already a place where they feel inundated? Or is this maybe a space where our brand and our message could stand out and have a little bit more impact? So taking a deeper look at some of the context as we look at those moments has really helped us make sure that we are focused in the areas that we have the most impact and that we're saying the right things. So one of the brands that we partnered with to do just that was a financial services client. They brought us a big challenge. So they needed to increase their unaided brand awareness in the US, which is currently hovering, it was about -4%, and their competitor was at about 53%. So not a small feat to undertake. But what we did is we started with the audience. We took a look at what were some of those unique traits about their audience versus that competitor, and we found some really interesting things. One of the things that we found was they really were focused on, or they really were much more open as it looked to talking about finances, discussing, their needs. So that was something that was really different, but they also really prioritized the seamless, simple experience. That was key to them. When we looked at what was the thing that really mattered in the differentiator, that stood out above all. So that really led us to crafting an experience strategy that allowed us to really lean into the brand strengths in that area. And next, we uncovered 2 distinct consumer journeys. And this was really interesting because these are small business owners. And we looked at, the pre-launch journey, that's the journey that businesses take before launching their companies. And then the post-launch journey, which was when companies are starting to have to evaluate and make decisions about what partners they're bringing in. So you could imagine that the pre-launch journey was a lot more optimistic, was a little bit more joyful, a little bit less stressful. And that post-launch journey was definitely fraught with a lot more stress. So that need for a streamlined, simple experience was even more important. And then what we were able to do is then go stage by stage through that decision journey and map out the experiences that the brand could create for the audience. And we did that throughout the entire journey from pre-launch to post-launch of the business. And it really allowed us to prioritize and identify the roles of each channel in the media mix, which was incredibly impactful. We got to where we needed to be for them. We had an overall lift of 569% in organizations paying for brand services. And the goal was 125% lift. So some really great performance when we focused on the customer, really understanding that journey, and then how we mapped that with the right creative. So third one, never sacrifice for scale. This is huge as we think about some of the things Cari started to touch on. We know that the bar has been raised for what people expect to see from brands and the experiences that people are used to engaging with and are willing to engage with brands. And it's interesting, as we've gone out and asked ourselves as marketers, how are we doing? Are we meeting that bar? A lot of us think that we're not. So there was a review of creative, looked at millions of ads from the world's leading advertisers. And of our own industry, we said that just 20% of the executions met our standard of quality. So we ourselves are saying that we are not meeting the bar that we believe consumers have, that we as consumers have for quality as we think about, the omni-channel experience. It certainly is table stakes these days, right? We know that that's what consumers expect. And we're actually seeing that retailers are saying that that they can lose 10 to 30% of sales if they don't meet customers' omni-channel experiences. So that's huge. We're saying that just about 20% of what we're putting out there is meeting experiences, and retailers are saying that this is huge impact for them if we're not doing that. So, as we think about that need to be able to meet people where they're at, we also know that our teams have gotten a lot smaller. We're being asked to do a lot more with a lot less. And a lot of us have seen marketing teams shrink, while we have so many more digital tools and so many things at our disposal to be able to do a lot with. We also are, a lot of times our teams are strapped. So it's really important as we think about how to augment that. How do we go out and make sure that we're finding the right partners that are nimble enough, but you're not dealing with 10, 15 different partners where you have a really fragmented brand experience. How do we find a partner that is able to meet you where you're at with also grow and scale as the brand's needs grow and scale? So one of the partners that we worked with that was kind of tackling a similar challenge was CLR. So CLR is a legacy cleaning product. A lot of their legacy, though, one of their main challenges is it lied within one product. And I'm sure many of you have had the gray jug, calcium lime rust, either it's sitting underneath your kitchen sink or it is in your garage right now. But they have a lot of other SKUs and their brand had grown. And so their challenge is, how do we take that fantastic legacy and equity that we have in this calcium lime and rust product and halo onto that to our full range of CLR SKUs? And do that by creating a seamless omni-channel experience. So one of the things we started with was, how do we create, how do we take a look at what the brand has been known for? What is that equity? What is it that consumers really look to and appreciate from CLR, and take that into kind of an anthemic rallying cry? And we got there with this idea of been there, outdone that. CLR has been known for tackling the toughest of toughest stains. And what was interesting as the cleaning world has evolved, and as we'd seen things like Clean Talk, where people are getting new tips and hacks and, trying out all of these unproven products that really weren't up to the task, this was really important because people needed something that was going to get the job done. So we got to this rallying cry that we are able to take that equity and halo that onto the rest of the SKUs in the CLR portfolio. And then, we also had to take a look at what could we do with the budget that we had that was just not as large as some of the competitors that we were up against. So we had to outsmart, not outspend. So really sharpening our message through efficient tactics, focusing on what are the key products that we are going to support in the time frame, and really aiming at our audience, looking for a cleaning companion, not a quick fix. So really focusing on what is that right audience that is going to be really receptive to this been there, outdone that message, and is really looking for something proven and in that moment. And, through all of that work, we really were able to outperform ourselves, and we were able to continue to adjust, right? Making sure that we were continuing to look at, how is that omni-channel experience playing out? How are we continuing to optimize and make sure that we are in those right spaces and places, and that we have the right products in the spaces and places? So Cari, I'll let you talk about the next two.
This is my phase 2 deep cuts version, Liz, of what you say, which is just because you can doesn't mean you should. I take that advice too. It's not just for your kids. So we as marketers have so many tools and so much innovation coming at us all the time. And it's amazing and it's fun and it's cool. But how do we decide what we should do, not just what we can do? And a fundamental rule is, does the innovation that we are going to use have people at the center? How does it impact consumers? How does it impact us as marketers? So that's the yardstick that we use. We say a lot, it is the Wild West out there. So there are so many choices of things that we can do. And as you can see here, 54% of marketing leaders talk about increasing innovation. 43% of them strongly agree that generative AI is going to be a huge impact for all of us. I can't imagine that there is anybody on this call who is not feeling the impact of technology innovation, or who hasn't at least 2 or 3 times this morning used AI to get part of your job done. So one of the things that's so important about these tools is that one of the ways we keep people at the center is, do these tools make us better at the most important things that we do? Do these tools make us better creative thinkers? How do we stand on top of these tools to come up with bigger and better ideas that bridge gaps between communities, that solve problems for marketers, and that connect brand and demand? So we talk to our own employees. We are using these tools a lot, as I'm sure many of you are. And what we're hearing back are things that I think are so exciting. These tools enable us to spend 2 to 3 times more time thinking about ideas than before. I was so happy to read this feedback. I love this because this is the opportunity to stand on top of the tools and unlock our own human creative potential. It certainly enhances any creative's tool set, the ability to visualize what's in your mind, the ability to more quickly communicate those ideas to people, the ability to really quickly research anything that we can find. So as we stand on top of these things, that's how we should be thinking about them. We also need to make sure more than ever, we've got to have the right people, right? These tools force us to be more human, to be more creative, to be stronger thinkers. So we had one innovation in particular that I think is really fun, and that is purposefully not Gen AI, because we want to talk about, there's a whole world of innovation out there that we need to bring to bear for our clients. So this one in particular is a 3D scanner. As we think about consumer experience, and we think about another thing Liz said, which is, how do you scale without sacrifice? How do we make sure that we can give a consumer a really compelling experience of a product in the virtual world, reaching many more consumers with that experience in a way that honors the quality of the brand, and a way that features all of the amazing things about the product? So this way we answer that, this is the first reality grade 3D scanning technology in the United States. It creates did any of you ever see Will It Blend, right? So this is Will It Scan. That's what we're doing at the agency right now, Will It Scan. So feel free to send us a challenge. Can we scan it? I think we can. But it creates this reality grade digital twin of a purse, of a shoe. It supports virtual try-ons, supports e-commerce in a lot of interesting ways. And it scales without sacrifice, because once you create one 3D scan, you have created an infinite number of stills or photo opportunities or sort of ways to work with your brand. So it's simple and it's fast, and it permits scaling without sacrifice, keeping the consumer experience at the center, which is why we went out and partnered with CoVision in order to do this, because it is people first. The last one, number 5, could be the first one. It could be all of them. It is, in my mind, and I think I can speak for Liz too, and us as a leadership team, the most important one. When we think about how do we bring the best things as marketers to our clients, how do we get the best results? How do we make the kind of impact on culture that we want to make? Inclusion is the key. If we can do inclusion right, we know already how to bridge the brand and demand teams. If we can do inclusion right, we already know how to lean in towards innovation. If we can do inclusion right, we already know how to embrace and activate new communities on behalf of our clients. And the data supports that. We'll share some of it here, but it is not hard to find. So inclusive companies are more likely to be leaders in innovation. Of course they are. It is the bringing in of new thinking. It is the activating of interesting minds and life experiences. Inclusive teams make better business decisions twice as fast. Of course they do, because they're able to bring in new ideas already. And certainly diverse companies, 70% more likely to capture new markets. We rely on the beauty of people's minds and their lived experiences. And we know that hiring in that diverse talent isn't enough. People have to be heard. They have to have influence. They have to have a seat at the table as they are in order to get the maximum impact of the diversity that we're all looking for. One of the questions that we get asked a lot is, okay, that all sounds great, but how do you do it? How does that really become the kind of place that you work? How does inclusion truly do everything that it can do for creativity? There are many principles, but there are three that we use a lot. The first is embrace how people want to do their best. This means a lot of things, but what it means the most is you, whoever you are, have a vision in your head of what work looks like. Think about it. Maybe you thought of a place. Maybe you thought of a way you work. Maybe you thought of an amount of time. Everybody's is different. And when we look to activate different people's brains, we need to create those environments. So at Betty, we think about creating different sensory environments within the office. We think about hybrid work environments. We think about flexibility. You need to promote somebody's own path. So traditionally, many years ago, there was a path through a department that you took. Maybe for some people that's right, but as leaders and as champions of inclusion, we need to go to the individual and really understand what are their passions and their goals. And when we align on that path for them, they will do their best work for us, and we can be the best place to work for them. And then make inclusion opportunities possible. We could do a whole nother webinar about how important I think strong BRGs or employee resource groups are. At Quad, we have many of them. And I find that not only are they enriching for the communities that they support, but they are an incredible education and activation opportunity for allies and for people who just want to learn. So put your time into those things for the good of the company and for the good of yourself. So I think we're at a point where we're ready to wrap up. And Liz, why don't you take us home?
Yeah, I'll wrap it up. And, hopefully you can see how connected so many of these are, and especially this last one that you just walked through, Cari. If we think about our creative team's favorite one, fight the beige tax with truth, it's incredibly important that we're also thinking about who are the people, at the table that are coming together to create the work. If we think about our imperative to put work out there into the world that people see as relevant, that is bold, really thinking about the diversity of our teams. Like, I love that connection, Cari. Thank you for bringing that up, because that's so important when that is the new bar. We think about that. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. Really thinking about that 360 connection strategy and making sure that we're not just looking at the context, but what's behind and around the context of those moments. What are those barriers that might prevent us from breaking through in that moment? How are people consuming media or being connected to from other brands in the category in that moment? Asking those questions is really going to push your teams to make sure that you really are focused on the true moments that people are most receptive, and then understanding and collaborating on, all right, well, what is the creative and what is the right message based on that context in those moments? Sacrifice for scale. We're all being asked to do so much with so much less. So really thinking about how are we making sure that we are still not taking an eye off the quality. Hopefully, as we're all having these discussions, and if we go back to, that same group of people that we're asked to evaluate how we're all doing, hopefully that 20% becomes a lot higher when we're taking a look at Are we meeting are we meeting consumers' bar for quality? Hopefully that gets better, right? And really thinking about how are we taking all of these tools, right? We are, you said the Wild West, Cari. That's so true, but really also an amazing place when we think about the ability to focus so much more on creativity, the ability to scale our ideas more quickly and get those out there into the world. And then to do all of that with inclusion at its core, like some really amazing principles. And if we leave you with one thing, this is our favorite quote from our namesake, the co-founder of Quad, Betty Quadracci: dare to think differently and creatively. And I think at the heart of all of the things we talked about, it is that creativity is still at the core as we think about bridging that gap from brand and demand. It's, one is not in service of the other. So if we can remember one thing, we will leave you with this. And I will turn it over to you, Marissa, for some Q&A.
All right. Well, thank you. Cari, Liz, that was awesome. So much great information. I really enjoyed it. Great creative, as I know we talked about earlier today before we went live, but it was really so interesting to hear your perspective on how these various teams need to work together to consider all factors to ensure these effective strategies and output. I loved the fantastic examples you gave throughout the presentations and also those quotes you shared from your team. So thank you so much for this. And now, as you said, let's get to the Q&A. We have quite a few questions that have come in, and there's still time. So if anybody has additional questions, please continue to submit them as we go through some that have already come in. Liz, first question for you. What's the number one thing brand teams want demand teams to know and vice versa?
I love this question. Thank you. It's a great one. I think this gets back to what we were talking about around the 360 connections planning. And really understanding, I think that there is a misconception that it's enough to just find the right spaces and places. And as long as we're in front of people and as many places as possible, our message is going to break through. And I think really understanding that, it's about going deeper and really understanding what's happening for people in those moments, taking the time to dive in and look at, are people receptive in those moments? What's surrounding them? What are the barriers? And then making sure that our teams are collaborating and that we're taking the time to take that information and use that to make the creative better and more relevant. That the more that the creative team understands about what's happening in those spaces and places, the better they can create more impactful, creative. That bringing those two things together is just going to make it so much more powerful and a better experience for consumers.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing that for what both teams need to be aware of. Cari, for this next one, I'd love your take. Do you recommend brand marketers being involved with the strategy, planning, and execution of performance campaigns? Like, do they need their hands in all of those areas?
Yes. Yes. Oh my gosh. We brand marketers have to have a deep understanding of the experience of their brand top to bottom. So absolutely. And that's part of inclusion. And that's part of everybody being aware and leaned in as a team for the good of the brand.
All right. So that was a strong yes for all of those areas. So thank you. Okay, Liz, the next question for you. One of our viewers says, I've noticed many brands are beginning to cater to what some may perceive as niche interest to demonstrate authenticity and connect with consumers. How should a brand go about defining what fandom they want to celebrate?
I love that. I think that goes back to, there was a stat earlier that it was 83% of consumers, if a brand is showing that authentic connection in their communities, and that's really what they're talking about, is finding what are those communities that are really important and really impactful. And that also there's an authentic connection to the brand. I think first it starts with, really diving in and understanding the audience and understanding what are the things that are most meaningful to them and what are the communities that they're a part of. But then, you also have to understand what's authentic to the brand. There's a lot of places and a lot of communities where a brand does not have a right to play, or where a brand probably should not be entering or connecting with people. So really having an honest assessment of that as well, of that authenticity of, how do I have something to offer that community? Do I have something to offer within that space? We talk a lot about brand action. And really, it's simply what must a brand must do to create demand, and really being more action oriented in those spaces. If you have something to offer, if you have something that you can do for people that feels authentic, then that's a win.
All right. So it seems like just really understanding that audience and what's going to resonate with them the most.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you for sharing that. Cari, the next question came in, I believe, as you were in some of your closing slides. So I'll pass this one to you. As budgets get tighter, some clients decide that taking budget away from brand and focusing solely on demand is the best strategy. What are your methods for proving out the positive impact on revenue from continuing to invest in brand?
Absolutely. So, going into any budget planning session or any year with a predetermined learning agenda and set of metrics is going to be really important, because oftentimes your brand impact is built over time. And while I understand the focus on demand for immediate return, we need to make sure that even our demand driving activities are laddering back up to that brand. So I think that there's a lot of measurement tools that can give us the idea or the impact of that brand over time. But really the core answer to that is we need to make sure that everything we do supports the brand, so that when we need to move budgets around, we aren't making too big of a sacrifice on either side.
All right, thank you. Well, speaking of measurement, Cari, what are some shared KPIs or metrics that benefit both brand and demand teams?
So we don't typically believe, we typically advise clients not to have a hero metric. It can be distracting, and it can sort of guide us to lean too far into one particular piece of performance, blurring the picture. So we believe in multiple metrics taken together to create a full picture of what's happening with the brand. So we can look at everything from net promoter score as we think about brand health. We can look at things like brand awareness as we think about brand health. And then we can look at the engagement metrics attached to demand and the response metrics attached to demand. And we can look at those things together. And I think that the entire picture is what's shared by both teams, and accountability for the entire picture needs to be shared from both teams.
Okay, thank you. That's really very helpful. I know oftentimes we get questions about what good looks like, which metrics people should consider. So thank you for your perspective on that. We are going to take one more question today. What tools or technology do you suggest for better collaboration between brand and demand teams? I think you both will have a good perspective on this. Cari, you want to go first?
I think that there are so many tools, and I would recommend using the tool that people are most likely to adopt. So consistency is king in terms of collaboration. Just get everybody on the same tool, whatever it is, and commit to it.
All right, Liz, what are your thoughts?
I agree wholeheartedly. I think also establishing some sources of how you use the tool, right? Everyone, not only are there different tools, but people can use it differently. Am I emailing you? Am I Slacking you? Am I Teamsing you? We've got a lot of ads coming at us. We've got a lot of, points of communication coming at us as well. So I think making it as easy, just setting some rules of engagement and taking the time to talk to the teams about how they work in those tools, I think is really helpful as well.
Yeah, that's a great point. Well, thank you both for sharing that. And thanks to both of you, Cari and Liz, for such a great presentation and content today, and especially for answering so many of those great questions from our audience. So appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here.
Thanks, Marissa.
Thank you so much. Well, before we wrap up today, I'm just going to take a moment to tell you about eMarketer's media channels. You can register for live analyst and tech talk webinars on our events page at emarketer.com/events. Don't forget to tune into Behind the Numbers, which is our eMarketer daily podcast. And finally, please subscribe to our newsletters. Thank you all for joining us. And thanks again to Cari, Liz, the team at Quad, and our eMarketer studio team behind the scenes for making this webinar possible. We'll see you all on the next Tech Talk.